Good evening, Mr. Oliver. Can you unmute yourself? Okay.
We don't have the headset available, so we'll have to go physically to the room to be a part of the breakout session.
Good evening, Mr. Oliver.
So this is the Asia room. If you're interested in security, law and order, balancing regulation.
Hi, Mr. Oliver. If you can hear me, you can now unmute yourself.
Okay.
Oh,
Okay,
great. Hi, good evening. Good evening, sir.
Good evening. You can keep on yelling at me to unmute myself, but I cannot because you're controlling it.
Yeah, I'm
I
so
feel
sorry.
very inadequate.
So sorry about that, sir.
No problem.
Okay, can we please check your video?
Yes, of course.
Great.
So this is the video. Can you see it? And the microphone is hopefully working as well.
Can you see him?
Okay. So I turn it off for now.
Okay, yes, we're good. Okay, sorry, sir, can you turn it on again? It's not actually showing on the screen.
Sure.
Okay, great. Thank you. We see you very clearly.
Okay.
Great.
Very
All
good.
right. So we'll be back here very shortly in another maybe 2 minutes. Okay, thank you so much.
Good evening. Well, thank you for joining us. This is the breakout session that would be focusing on the role of transparency, accountability, and effective institutions in governance. And to tackle this, that's a really heavy topic, with me is a panel of distinguished fellows. I have 6 of them. 5 will be joining us remotely. In order to save time, I will just quickly go through introductions of them and then delve into it. So we have Professor Patatomi, who should be joining us live. I understand he's still making his way there. Professor Patatomi is Professor of Political Economy. He is a management expert and founder of Center for Value in Leadership. I also have Mr. Oliver Stolpe, who is the representative of United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime in Nigeria. We have Dr. Rabiu Olowo. Dr. Rabiu Olowo is the Honorable Commissioner for Finance in Lagos State. We have Mr. Soji Apampa, who is the co-founder and CEO for the Convention on Business Integrity. We have Mr. Joe Cosma. He's the Africa Government and Public Sector advisory sector leader for Ernst & Young. And finally, but definitely not the least, we have Mr. Gabriel Okeowo. He's the principal lead and CEO of Budget. And for purposes of this session, all of the panelists have agreed that I can call them by their first name. So welcome to my panelists, and thank you for giving us your time. I am looking forward to this. Jumping right in. Oliver, so in preparing for this session, we realized that a number of multilateral organizations, including the United Nations, have identified transparency as a key characteristic of good governance. And this was perhaps reiterated from the plenary session that just happened on the importance of transparency. But before we delve into tackling this topic, I would like you to spend a few minutes to just tell us what transparency is in relation to governance.
Yes, with great pleasure, and thank you so much. And well, it's a real honor to join you and the fellow panelists for this very interesting session. To address your question, now I'm looking always, whenever anybody asks me on anything that relates to anti-corruption, my first look is always into the United Nations Convention Against Corruption. And that convention uses the term transparency amply, but without necessarily defining it in a sort of narrow sense. However, it frames it very well. In these 9 times that it is mentioning it, it basically gives the context in which transparency is recommended, is required by the convention, and therefore the 189 states that have signed up to this convention, including of course Nigeria, have committed to adhere to. So first of all, it basically says that transparency in general is a key ingredient to literally all preventive anti-corruption policies. So no matter what we're looking at in terms of policies that are specifically destined, aimed to prevent the occurrence of corruption, to reduce the vulnerabilities to corruption, transparency is a key element to it. The next, I think, dovetails perfectly with what His Excellency, the Deputy Governor of Lagos State, just mentioned a few minutes ago, literally. That relates to the issue of recruitment, hiring, retention, promotion, retirement of civil servants, as a means, obviously, to prevent nepotism in that process and promote a merit-based and thus an effective and professional civil service. I still hear the echo of the call for competence, competence, competence. The next one is maybe even more critical, and it relates to the funding of candidature to elected public office and the funding of political parties. Obviously, the fish, as it is famously always said, starts to stink from the head when it rots, and that is exactly where that specific provision seeks to aim at. Another important element is relating transparency to the issue of the appropriate prevention as well as appropriate management of conflicts of interest. Transparency in public procurement, an obvious requirement, in the management of public finances, in the public administration in general, with regard to the organization, the functioning, the decision-making processes. The public should have access to all of that, but also as concerns the private sector. And here in particular, the issue of beneficial ownership of legal persons. So we need to know basically who is behind a legal entity in order to determine essentially of whether this entity is used legally or also potentially for illicit purposes. And finally, in the promotion in general of the participation of civil society in understanding and contributing to the decision-making in processes that concern the public administration. So the convention basically very holistically gives us all these different elements where transparency is critical. And I think as such, it gives us a really excellent yardstick, whether it is at state level, whether it's at federal level, to determine how we should frame transparency in very practical terms. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Oliver. And thank you for that. It's clear that transparency cuts across everything we do. And as an institution, everything we set out to do, we should be embedding transparency in it. So I was going to call on Professor Utomi. I understand he's in the room. I'm not sure if he's ready. Or can I just move on?
Oh, okay. I am ready. I'm here.
Prof.
Yes.
Oh, okay. Welcome, sir. I had said at the start that everybody had agreed that I could call them by their first name.
Absolutely.
No, but I can't call you by your first name.
Whatever makes you happy.
So I will stick to Prof. Okay, so Prof, going by what Oliver just told us and how embedded transparency should be across governance, looking at government in particular, what benefits do you, in your opinion and from your experience, do you think government stands to provide and derive by being transparent?
Lots and lots and lots of benefits. First of all, the way that people make decisions, investment decisions, how to manage choices and all of that, is based on how much information they have. Now, what tends to happen quite a bit of the time that we don't pay enough attention to in our country is that people constantly evaluate us based on how much sunlight there is. If people don't see enough, they assume that behind the opaque walls, something fishy is happening, even when it's not happening. And usually it's easy for opaque things to lead to untoward happening. So the information asymmetries that kind of tend to exist, the fact that you're not sure how people in government will behave is a huge moral hazard. And an investor that looks at an environment where they can't see enough will be reluctant to invest. Even when they make the decision to invest, they know that they have to be sure, they have to protect themselves. Now that process of hedging leads to significant transaction costs And that means that that economy cannot be as competitive as one that does not have that kind of high transaction cost. So it is of benefit to government to attract investment. It is of benefit in the pure adjudication of justice. When people don't know, I was listening to, I think it was Candy Johnson in the session before, if people don't know and presume, and often what comes out is worse than the reality, they then act based on that perception and do even more harm. Like people thinking that the system is designed to be unjust, and that, and so they act against the system in a way that prevents the synergy that people collaborating and cooperating could have earned. And so economic growth is made difficult, implementation of justice systems are made difficult. So there's so many things that can go wrong if we don't have transparent systems, and so many things that can go very, very right, as I said, like investments, if we do have clearly transparent systems.
Thank you. Oh, okay. Thank you very much, sir. Joe, with everything we know or we've heard so far, one, transparency cuts across everything we do, across all of the activities. Two, there are immense benefits. It should be a given, right, that our institutions would exhibit transparency. However, we find that according to the World Economic Forum's Global Competitiveness Report from 2019, Nigeria had a budget transparency score ranked 83 out of 141 and an e-participation score of 105 out of 141. Those are not very transparent. Those are not evidence of being transparent. How can government make access to information and make citizen participation easy?
Thank you. Very true. When I look at Nigeria and when I look at some of the systems that the country has, both at federal and state level, it doesn't make sense that the ratings coming out of the Global Competitiveness Report reflect those positions. I will also just reflect on what the prof said. Okay, if people don't have information, they will presume, and it will be very difficult to move them out of those positions which they've made those assumptions. So for me, making information available is one of the most important functions that government has to do to ensure transparency, efficiency, and effectiveness of government institutions. This principle, by the way, applies to even the private sector. So it's the same. One can say citizens of the country or citizens of Lagos are actually key stakeholders. They are shareholders in the economy. And as shareholders, they are obliged to get the right information at the right time, especially information relating to financial performance, public management, assets of the government. Okay? We also know that, investors, development partners, they take a cue out of, information that comes out of our media outlets and our citizens, the trust that is reflected in them. So how does government ensure access to relevant information? If you asked this question a few years ago, the answer would be a very standard one. Allow independent media, allow development of community radio stations. Things have changed a little bit. At the moment, if you need to get the access to information to your citizens, one is got to really reflect around those traditional ethos, as well as bringing in the digital government into play. Government information is in silos. Government information is not circulated to the people who should have it. People assume that information is available and it's there for everyone to access, but it's not the same. I want to bring a third element that is very interesting for me. the introduction of social media and availability of digital information in Africa, especially in our youth in Nigeria. I don't have to say much. The events of the last 6 months can tell that. Okay. What it shows you, arguably, there seems to be more trust in this model of communication than in the traditional models. So let me pose a question. If platforms for crowdsourced information have their roots in Africa, which they have, why are our public institutions not leveraging that? The answer lies in investing in digital government. The success of Asian countries, and I may say closer to home, if you look at the success of Rwanda right now, many comments are made around that. It's around how you use information and make it accessible to your population. We need to do the same. At the moment, federal and state government information lies in pockets. Okay, we need to put that together. We need to string and start making a story around that, which makes sense to our citizens. The next point is execution. A lot of our information, taking you back to the budget transparency score, we have information around our planning. We don't have information around our execution. Okay. Execution means we have to track whatever we have planned in government right up to its logical conclusion. Progress reports, and this is not just the financial information, this is also the operational information. If we've put a budget to the health sector and say in Lagos State we are going to build 3 clinics, we need to go back to that information and make sure that is happening. So for me, just to conclude this particular discussion, is to say, I recommend that the government comes together, especially certain institutions like Treasury, Supreme Audit institutions, bring some of the information around sustainability, etc. information, just more than the financial information. Make it available to the population in a way which makes sense. Make it available at a local government level, not just at a high level, so that people can access some of this information, and then the trust starts building. It's not an event. This is a long-term process. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Joe. Thank you very much, Joe. Gabriel, just following on from that, because Joe talked about digitization and the ease of accessing information. Now, you're a CEO of Budget, and I know Budget is one of the organizations at the forefront of harnessing technology in facilitating change through transparency and access to information. How can we better leverage technology to improve transparency?
All right. Thank you very much, Mary. And I'm going to be building on what everyone before me have said about transparency, because we first need to get to that point where we have understanding of transparency and the role transparency will play in governance before we can embrace and we can, benefit fully from leveraging technology to improve transparency. And I will add to what every other person has said to say. Transparency, for me, the essence of transparency in government is going to help you to build and gain the trust of the people you are serving. Transparency is also going to help you to show to the people you are leading that you are accountable to them. And then transparency is going to also show that you are willing to run an inclusive government that allows the voice of everyone to be accommodated in how you run government. Now, if we build it on those 3, how should we then leverage technology to improve transparency? 3 things, which is also related to what Joe said. We'll talk about information availability. We'll talk about information accessibility. We'll talk about, and then we'll talk about inclusion, right? Feedback loop, right? Now, when you talk about information availability, that is like everything that is generally known right now. Practically every government has websites and information is put out. In fact, beyond website, we see governance being run now on social media. I mean, the governor of Lagos State, for example, can talk to us more than 30 times in a day, just from his Twitter handle, for us to know what the government is saying. And that's a one-way communication from the leader to the people, right? If we embrace the capacity of technology to improve transparency, we have to take it beyond just a one-way communication, what we are using to communicate to the people, to what we are also using to collect the feedback and collect concerns of the people. And that is where we talked about, we moved from just having information available to having information accessible, right? In accessibility of information now, you are also using technology to make information available in a manner that your citizens, your followers, the people you are leading, irrespective of their literacy level, are able to understand the information you are putting out. In information accessibility, you're also talking about reuse of information, reuse of data. So you can have situations where you release the data today through a technological platform. When that information, when it will contribute to improving transparency, when I can go back to that platform and I can meet that information there in a year's time, I can meet it there in 10 years' time, because this is technology. It should not be that an information is available today and is not available tomorrow. So we'll talk about accessibility, but beyond availability of information, beyond accessibility of information, is feedback, right? And that is what technology can allow you to do. If we take a population of Lagos, for example, that today we say, oh, population of Lagos is over 20 million people, right? Now, how can a government take concerns of 20 million people? And this is what technology can do. You can also use technology to collect feedback, and it's just a matter of creating some easy to use, user-friendly portal or platform that people can log into, right, to register their concern, to share their stories, to register their displeasure. And then it is not enough to collect feedback from the people, but the next time you are sharing information, it should be that the people can see themselves in the information you are sharing, to show that their concern is received, their concern, somebody is processing their concern, and that concern is then being put back into decision making and how governance is being implemented. And that way, right, you gain the trust of the people. That way, you will run an inclusive government where everybody still belonging, have a sense of belonging in the government, and that way you are going to be able, development is even going to be faster when people support what you are doing and they see themselves in it.
Great, great, well said. Thank you very much. Honorable I'm sorry, Rabiu habits. Rabiu, let's bring this home. So in Lagos State, what areas would you advise, or do you think government can focus on to be more transparent, or to be seen as transparent?
So thank you very much, Mary, and good afternoon again, all panelists and attendees. Just to create some kind of background, on top of what the other speakers have mentioned, I think for me, transparency means trust. If you look at the word of Howard Schultz, transparency is the currency that we use in government. Once a government is transparent, it will automatically earn the trust of the citizens. And also, according to the World Bank, the impact of transparency, or let's say accountability, has to be felt in the quality of governance, empowerment initiatives, service delivery, and ultimately, like I think Joe or Cosma said, moving towards reducing corruption. And that's why I believe that this session is going to provide that drive for us to discuss participatory governance that will deliver transparency, institutional effectiveness, and accountability in governance. Let me go very straight into the question in terms of what are the number of ways beyond, budget, security, and disclosing major projects that, that I think that government can demonstrate, transparency even more. There are quite a number of ways. I think one of it will be automating processes and procedures, because we believe that today things are manual. There are a lot of human interaction, which, at the end of the day makes everything more susceptible, to corruption. I also believe that having a clear manuscript on claims of multiplicity of taxes, would also help the government to demonstrate, more transparency in terms of what the people need to pay in terms of taxes, disclosures in respect of state finances, debt level, expenditure level, and everything that has to do with revenue. Another, very interesting area, I think Cosmos mentioned it, is the independence of the control functions. Like, let's say the Office of the Auditor General, who do they report to, where do their budget reside, and things like that, I think would help state governments, and even help Lagos State even more to be more, transparent. And also listening to the plenary session, recruitment and appointment into civil and public services. Out of all these that I've mentioned, I think two additional ones for me stands out in this discourse, and it will be the procurement process. The procurement process and citizens engagement. I'll just like very quickly to discuss why I think that these two areas will help government to be much more, to be much more transparent or demonstrate their level of transparency. I believe that the procure to pay process in governance transcends, even budget, security, and even disclosure of major projects. In order to imbibe transparency in public procurement, there needs to be an end-to-end deployment of e-procurement solution that will aid things like vendor registration, vendors' annual renewal, and most especially the bidding process for services and contracts, and also the periodic publication of contracts award. This, as far as I know, as one of the, officers, in terms of handling the Lagos State Procurement Agency, we have moved from a manual registration and manual bidding process of up to 10 MDAs. And the reason why I'm calling this is that there are improvement opportunities that still exist in terms of ensuring that the entire ministries, departments, and agencies in Lagos State are onboarded into the e-procurement solution, in ensuring that all 97 MDAs, by the end of 2021 or as we move into 2022, have been accommodated, embed, and grow into the e-procurement process. And we know that the procure to pay process is not unconnected with our position in the ease of doing business ranking. The ease of doing business ranking in Nigeria, with all sense of humility, is just talking about Lagos, Kano, and maybe one other state, meaning that Lagos is a key driver of this result. And if you look at the 2020 figures, you will see that Nigeria moved up 15 places. So it could be that some of the things that is being done in the procure to pay process is responsible for this movement. Transparency in procurement process enable processes and decisions to be monitored and reviewed. It helps to ensure that decision makers can be held accountable, and also helps open procurement to more competition. The second point for me, apart from procurement in terms of e-procurement solution, is citizens engagement. And I think this has been discussed, to some level by one of the speakers. The creation of a truly working and innovative platform for managing relationship between the government and the governed is very, very important. A place or a means where citizens can give their feedback, just like Gabriel said, not just a one-way communication, but two-way communication, where citizens can also give their feedback to provide services, that government, gives, and can be rest assured that within, 24 hours, 48 hours, they can get their responses back. A platform that will promote communication and connectivity between the government and the citizens, a platform that will inform government on the problems or issues occurring in a particular community, maybe outside of town or not in the main city, a platform to enable citizens to inquire about government services and provide useful suggestions, a platform to provide, a one view, a snapshot access, like a dashboard, even for the State Executive Council, to see performance of MDAs on a KPI basis on how they have fulfilled the needs of the people, how the needs of the people have been met. A platform that provides useful input to make state budget and planning easier. All these are things that truly would demonstrate, a more transparent, government and state government side by side, in terms of when you want to rank government. And in Lagos State, there's what we call the Citizens Gate that is structured to provide this citizens engagement. But like we always say, in terms of continuous improvement, there are a lot of improvement opportunities, in the way that we can engage citizens better. And I think that that should be our focus going forward. Thank you very much, Mary.
Okay, thank you, Rabiu. In fact, I was afraid that you were going to preempt my next question. But I like the part about participatory governance, the part about citizen engagement, and that feedback loop that we spoke about. Saji, coming to you. I don't see Saji.
I'm ready for you.
Okay, great. I believe, talking about citizen engagement and access to information, everything is revolving around how to get the citizen involved and working with government. And in fact, looking at our system of governance, I believe it was Abraham Lincoln who first said, democracy is a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. We run a democratic government. As such, if it is for us, by us, of us, we expect that the government should be accountable to us. So how do we improve the relationship between civil society and other stakeholders to drive accountability in government?
Thank you. For this question, I don't want to be philosophical, as most people normally are when it comes to these issues. I'd like to be practical. And there's a project that has been running in Lagos State, but it involves the federal and other stakeholders. It's got government, business, civil society, all sorts of actors. And it's through the Maritime Anti-Corruption Network, where we've been looking at how do we run vessel clearance without corruption. Most people may not know that when vessels come into Nigeria, the same thing that happens to you or I when we're driving happens to ships and tankers as well, where the officials tell them to clear well. Where are your particulars? This one will cost you $1,400. It will cost you $5,000. And that the amounts are magnified. Sometimes they may tell you there's an infraction, they're going to charge $5,000 per head of crew. And if you don't go, meanwhile, these vessels are on charter. So some of them, it's $25,000 a day and so on. And so they find themselves forced to try to part with $500 rather than pay $25,000 for being delayed. So what the project set out to do in partnership with all the government agencies at the ports is not to fight corruption, is to get government, civil society, and business to define what are the standard operating procedures. What should happen? How should it normally happen? Then they agreed grievance mechanisms. What if it doesn't happen the way you have defined? And then they began to agree processes for, shall I say, consequence management. That, okay, so it has now happened the way it shouldn't have happened. How do I get redress? How do I get this vessel to leave on time? And we set up a help desk, a simple help desk, where every vessel coming that is a member of this network coming to Nigeria gives advance notice, and they are assisted in real time till they leave Nigeria's waters. Now, between last year and now, there have been 95 such assists, and we have had about 15 incidents. And I can promise you that in each of those incidents, they were asking them for several $1,000s to be paid for no offense. And that in each case, barring 2 or 3, we have been able to get them completely resolved within 1 and 4 hours. Now, this used to take 72 hours 3 years ago, and it used to be almost in 90% of the visits that there were corruption issues. Simply by taking the statistics, working with Shippers Council, getting it to the heads of the agencies, we have found that the vessels have been able to avoid corruption. Based on it, we have 4 learnings, simple learnings. Number 1, the business case for avoiding corruption and building integrity must be clear. The need of Nigeria to improve its trade facilitation was on one side, and the need of the vessels to avoid the UK Bribery Act, which made failure to prevent bribery an offense, was on the other side, because the executives could be prosecuted under that act and go to jail. So they started this in 2012. So the ability to be able to have that public feedback mechanism, which was alluded to by Dr. Rabiu, but you need something on the citizen side as well, where the citizens are able to see very transparently what is declared as the process by government and what do they find when they scrutinize and how do they square the two together. And this is how we've been able to get improving levels of transparency and responsiveness at the ports. So corruption hasn't disappeared and it has not reduced, but the ability to operate your vessel through the ports without paying a bribe has increased. And that is really what we care about. And it is on that basis that civil society is now engaging with government on the basis of the statistics, on the basis of where change is still needed and where more compliance is needed. We're now having better engagement in order to drive accountability. And I dare say that with this now, with vessel clearance improving, we're now turning our attention to cargo clearance. And I think if it's improving in the seaports, it can improve at the airports. And if it's improving at sea and airports, why can't it improve at NAFDAC or FIRS or anywhere else that there is a service delivery interface with the ordinary citizens? And this is a great opportunity for Lagos State government to have this collective action between government, business, and civil society, able to talk in concrete terms and measure in very concrete terms how progress is being achieved. So each side is announcing the progress as it is going on, and everybody's gaining in confidence. So we have now almost 2 or 3 vessels announcing their arrival every day. And that has been increasing from about 3 years ago when they were all scared to use the system. So what am I saying? It takes this collaboration between government, business, and civil society in order to drive improved accountability. It takes transparency. It takes the tone at the top of government. It takes the organizational capacity to be able to run this kind of feedback mechanism, have the issues escalated to the top of the agencies, and have the agencies respond. For instance, today, there was a case with immigrations, which was escalated to the top of immigrations, the Comptroller General's office, and they were able to get their rank and file to fall in line and do the right thing. It takes that kind of commitment from Lagos State government for this kind of partnership to work. And once it is in place, you will find better relationship with civil society around very concrete things, and it will propel Lagos State to number 1. But we have to carefully frame the call to action. It's not a moral issue. It is clearly a business issue, and it's business on government side, business on the corporate side, and also business on the civil society side. Everybody is doing what they're best at in order to get things to operate better for the state.
Okay, great. Rabio, just following on from that, very quickly, how can we get this sort of thinking to how can we get this sort of thinking to permeate the DNA of the public service? How can we get this accountability DNA to permeate the rank and file within the public service?
Yeah, thank you very much, Mary. I hope you can hear me now.
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. And thank you, Dr. Apampo. So a well-orchestrated governance structure depends on everybody to do their job. And you know what? The word accountability, honestly, it scares me a little bit, you know, especially, you know, from a public sector perspective, because accountability has a lot to do with the fact that you need to have a clear expectation, you need to have required work tools. There is noise coming somewhere.
Please go on. Oh, we can't hear you anymore. So for accountability to be established, one needs to have clear expectation, must have required work tool. There has to be some element of reward, and which I call consequence management. There should be consequence for good outcomes. There should be consequence for bad outcome. At the end of the day, what you want to achieve is self-ownership and high accountability. And so that we don't go theoretical, I'm going to give you a typical Lagos State case study. And it's the case study of the Lagos State Internal Revenue Service and how we have tried to entrench or establish accountability in that very important agency of government. When we came into government, we knew that we needed money to do all the things that we want to do, from education to road, and we believe that there's enormous opportunity in terms of taxes, and fiscal policy, administration, which the Lagos State Internal Revenue Service is supposed to deliver. What did we do? We assigned very clear expectation in terms of personal income tax. This is what we expect that we should deliver. Capital gains tax, this is what, we established clear expectation across the organization. Mr. Governor provided the required tool. He invested forward. He bought cars, pool cars, computers, things that have been lacking for some time. Invested forward, making sure that the required work tool is provided. At the end of the day, if you look at the entire public service structure in Nigeria today, one of the problems, or one of the very laughable thing I saw when I came into government was that how much are these government people being paid for the job that they do? Because if you pretend to be paying people, they'll pretend to be working. And that's been the story of our public service. And it now depends on who do you want to blame. Is it the person that is not paying enough, or is or somebody that is not earning enough? So what did we do differently for the staff of that agency, especially as we're passing through recession, we're passing through pandemic, very difficult time, which had the propensity to affect revenue generation. We provided them with clear expectation, like I've said, the required tool, and we told them that if you meet your target, meeting your target meaning that you do your work with more agility, you reduce leakages, there's less in corruption, meaning that the monies that are supposed to come into government coffers come, and you meet your target and exceed it, you will get a bonus for it. We are the only state in year 2020 that met its revenue target, 104%. Because we did all of these things. So there's accountability. They know that expectation has been set very clearly. Required work tool has been provided. There is consequence. If they meet their target and surpass it, they will get this. If they do not, they know what will happen to them at some levels.
we met and exceeded our targets in a pandemic and in a recession. About 104% of our taxable revenue came in 2020. And most of my colleagues from other states were asking questions, how did we do it? And this is just the formula. So, when defined accountability structures are used across public sector, you'll find people perform at a much higher levels. If a bar isn't set, people don't know, how high they should jump. So at the end of the day, to sum it up, consequence management is very key, and ensuring that people are provided with the required tool, and that expectations are set and clear right from get-go. I think it goes a long way in deepening and proving accountability in government. Thank you.
Thank you, Rabiu. Thank you, Rabiu. Oliver, so Rabiu has told us about the people, setting expectation. He talked about providing incentives. He talked about letting people know how high we need them to jump. Now, with that, for the sake of continuity, I guess, we need to go beyond people. So let's look at our institutions. How can we overcome the bottlenecks to institutional reforms and achieve effective, sustainable institutions as a standard?
Well, thank you so much. I think there's really a large range of responses to that. Let me just focus on 6 elements, and I'm focusing on them because I feel that these are areas where we have not yet done all that we can, where there is space and scope for doing more. Now, the first thing is, I think that's quite critical. Nigeria has, either because of joining various international agreements, conventions, and so on, or because of taking its own commitment towards its citizens, it has undergone a large number of commitments in the area of anti-corruption. But nobody is really following up on whether these commitments are actually being implemented. And I think that is something that both the business community, civil society, but even government itself could and should come together in order to look at that more specifically. Whether we're talking about the UN Convention Against Corruption, whether we're talking about the Open Government Partnership, and so on and so forth. And of course, the National Anti-Corruption Strategy, which is, by the way, not even available on government websites. The next thing I think that we can do better is starting to understand and use evidence, both of progress as well as of gaps, better. We are still, I think, at a stage where I have the feeling we are never quite interested what data is actually telling us unless the data confirms our preconceived notions. Then we are embracing it, otherwise we're condemning it. It seems sort of a pick and choose approach, and I think we need to move beyond that. One very specific example is the Nigerian Bureau of Statistics, with the support of UNODC and the British government, conducted the second corruption survey about a year ago. We published this survey. It's very detailed. It provides a massive amount of policy implications. Until this day, essentially neither the private sector nor government nor civil society has really made an effort to actually pick up on these policy implications and try to bring them further. And I tell you, at least I am absolutely convinced, and I've written that many, many times, that there is some absolute gems basically buried in this assessment in terms of like what we could do to make a tangible and very quickly recognizable difference in the life of the citizens. Then I think there is a certain tendency, and that's also why I love the project that Soji has been talking about so much, is we need to start identifying and addressing specific, succinct corruption problems that are affecting a clearly identifiable group of people or businesses, and that group is actually willing to invest time and resources to resolve. I think we really need to basically break up this corruption, whether you want to refer to this as a monster or just simply a big problem, into manageable bites and then eat away at it. And I think that is something that we still seem very often to sort of like plan the big throw, resolve all issues, and we end up actually resolving none of them. And that, of course, also undermines in the long run, I think, the expectations of the citizens. One very specific issue that remains to be fixed with great urgency is the complaint system. And I'm talking about system. Obviously, there's hundreds of different complaint systems in Nigeria presently operating, whether it's formal complaints to anti-corruption agencies, whether it is basically complaints to specific corruption desks, or simply just complaints desks in different institutions, but none of them seem to actually operating properly. When we asked in the survey that I mentioned before, when the Nigerian Bureau of Statistics asked, actually, we found out that about 1 in 5 Nigerians refuses the request for the payment of a bribe at least once during the year. So that's quite encouraging. That's basically 20% of the people. But when you then ask of how many of those that refused the bribe or actually paid the bribe went actually to report the incidents, it's 1 in 25. And when you then go on of those 1 in 25 who had actually an experience that is, so to speak, in accordance with the law, it's 1 in 7. So basically, we are doing a terrible job at responding to those citizens that come forward to essentially raise the flag. We are always calling on citizens, do more, come forward, refuse bribery. But when they actually do, we are not there for them. And we need to get better at that. Another point is there is some real potential in other good public sector policies that we could actually start to take much greater advantage of in order to advance governance. And what I mean specifically in this case is the issue of gender parity in our public institutions. We did a study just a few months ago, published it on Anti-Corruption Day, and it became so evidently clear that female public officers are comparatively far less likely. There might be different reasons for that, but that is the reality. They are far less likely to engage in bribe-seeking behavior than their male peers.
Happen overnight. I think we do have institutions that require significant institutional building to get them to where they should be. I don't want to just look at the public sector. I think once we start this process, we need to look at both the public and the private sector, because we are all equally in the system. We need to make this happen. Back to Soji's comment, it's not just about looking at the public sector and say, hey, do X, Y, Z. We also need to do our part in terms
for those who refuse to change behavior. But in the meantime, we're building a route which is integrity-based that people can choose. So that's what I'm talking about, that although corruption has not vanished, but people are able to escape it because there is a system of integrity that has been built, which gives them an alternative. So and as soon as you get a critical mass choosing it, then you will be able to sideline the corrupt order. But it requires the tone at the top. It requires the participation of all of the stakeholders, and especially the leaders of all the government agencies concerned. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Soji. Prof Utomi, I think the fact that we're having this conversation shows that there's a willingness to set the right tone at the top. However, Lagos State government is not an island. It has to work with different tiers of government. has to work with different stakeholders. Now, we've spoken about how it is important to have the cooperation of all stakeholders. How do we achieve this cooperation among the different tiers of government and among stakeholders? Practically, is Prof there? Prof. Hello? Did you guys hear me?
We can hear you.
Yes, Prof.
Yes, we heard you, and Prof is also talking on the background, I think.
Okay, but we can't hear him, can we?
Very faint.
Yeah.
Oh.
He needs to speak into the microphone.
All right, does this help?
Hello, Prof, we can't hear you.
It needs to use a microphone.
I'm using the microphone right now. I don't know which
Yeah.
one is.
No, I can't hear him at all.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
It's getting.
You can now hear me?
Yes.
Oh, okay, good. Well, I think that part of the confusion in the conversation is a misunderstanding of what institutions really mean. There's a tendency in this environment to think of institutions as things that you decree into existence. The Central Bank of Nigeria, Lagos State Ministry of Finance. That's not what an institution is really. An institution evolves. In fact, ultimately, institutions are settled habits of a community. Perhaps the best discussion of the subject was offered by Douglas North in a 1990 book, Institutions, Institutional Change and Economic Performance. And this is why the point Soji was trying to make was so important, even though I think that Soji keeps talking about corruption did not change, but no, I think Soji, it's not that corruption did not change. The fact that there were options made it difficult for somebody to engage in corrupt behavior. So corruption did change, but that's a different matter. We'll come to it. You know, in 1985, there was a conference in Nairobi that was sponsored by the Aga Khan Foundation. And that conference was about how a tripartite approach, that is of government, the private sector, and PDAs, as they were then called, private development agencies or civil society, ultimately lead to greater development. What that conference did not explicitly state is that that's the way to build institutions. Soji came to the Lagos Chamber of Commerce about, 30 years ago. I was a member of the Council of the Lagos Chamber, and they made a presentation that called on private sector leaders to publicly stand up and say, I will not take and I will not give. I think Soji remembers clearly that there were just 2 or 3 of us, of the 70 or so private sector leaders at that council meeting who were willing to do that. Now, the public sector, or the private sector, has as much a stake in strong institutions evolving as civil society, as the public sector, because it is in the pursuit of these self-interests that we all come to a recognition that you need boundaries that will ensure a level playing field for everybody's good, the common good of all, to be advanced. This is what institutions really are about. So, if private sector people are unwilling to publicly say, I will not give and I will not take, because they think that it will put them in a difficult position in doing business with the public sector, then we all have a problem. It is the private sector, goaded and pushed, encouraged, as it were, by civil society, that should then create arrangements that eventually turn out to be these boundaries. And there is a useful thing, like a tone at the top that Soji was mentioning. we're talking about communication, transparency, and all of that. A governor like that of Lagos can afford to have a weekly, at least a fortnightly fireside chat, as they used to be called, in which he talks to the people about the issues and even takes phone calls. If public-private sector people agree, there can be town hall meetings that are quarterly in which stakeholders are brought to speak to these issues. And then the whole idea of how to set up a consequence management framework that then makes the public sector, everybody, sensitive to how they should conduct themselves, not out of morality, nothing wrong with morality, is fantastic, but if people can see how their best self-interests, economic interests, are advanced by doing things differently. Because I think that many people who take bribes really don't think deeply enough to understand that that bribe may be the reason that their cousin will die tomorrow when they're supposed to get some service. Again, I think training is a very important part of this. If public sector people, everybody is exposed to a level of training that makes for this kind of critical thinking that takes the consequence of that behavior to a personal level, I think you'll begin to see a change of attitude. And there are many things that we need to see done, but this will come from all of these people. But first and foremost, a good tone at the top, and everybody being a stakeholder, owning this, because it has consequence for everybody's well-being. It's not about whether we are nice guys, whether people see us this way. You can see a direct relationship between transparency, low levels of corruption, and the quality of life that we all live. I can see it every day. And if we can manage to educate one another by having a rational public conversation, that's one of the biggest challenges we have in our society, because we don't have rational public conversation. And that is the essence of modernity. That's the essence of democracy, rational public conversation. Those kinds of processes, engaging public officials regularly, and everybody begins to find that their behavior has consequence for the quality of life that everybody else lives. And then we will begin to see progress. I don't know how much time I have. I can talk more, but I'm very careful not to eat up time. If I'm told how much time I have, I can go on, because there's a lot that needs to be said about this point. Because we have a Freedom of Information Act that is not being used to, and that as an institution, it can evolve if we effectively put systems in place, have the tech to support it, and people can seek information and get them as a right and know that it is their entitlement, and they can reduce discretion in how people make choices. We will see that this will come down, the level of corruption will come down, and we will see that our quality of life will go up, almost literally directly translated.
Okay.
All right.
Okay, thank you, Prof. I knew that I deliberately wanted you to speak last because I knew you would connect the dots from the beginning. I understand that there's somebody from the Institute of Directors who would like to make a few comments for about two minutes. Alaji Borodo from Institute of Directors. I think Prof is there with you, and he would like to say a few words. And after that, for a minute each, I'll just let my distinguished panelists just give us their closing remarks.
Okay.
Thanks, Prof. Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I mean, the time is fast spent. We're right at the end of it. I've listened through the process, the discussions right from the beginning until where we are now. And I think what I just need to emphasize is one of the issues that the Lagos State Commissioner for Finance, Dr. Lowe, emphasized in terms of proper processes, in terms of recruitment processes in governance, in terms of appointment processes in government, and also he did mention procurement processes. Now, talking about processes in terms of recruitment, just like it was said at the plenary earlier on, where His Excellency Deputy Governor was talking about civil servants who wanted to be permanent secretaries, and the government just said, hang on a minute, let's have a proper process, transparent process in terms of recruitment, who gets to what level. And with that, he really confessed that people are put through a process. At the end of the day, all the noises that were happening in the past, if there was no process, died down. And also, if you talk in terms of appointment processes, appointment into government office, public offices also, we need to really have a process whereby the right person with the right skills, the right competencies, and a friend of mine gets appointed in a public office, and wherein he knows that he has a responsibility to the constituency that he's supposed to be serving. And then thirdly, the procurement processes, I don't want to go into that. That's what the Dr. Olo has mentioned in terms of end-to-end technology-driven process, and I think that's one of the critical things that we need to look at. Now, finally, my comment about this is